Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us today for this conversation on the future of clean energy. I'm Reed Wilson, the founder and editor of Pluribus News, and I'm excited to be joined today by Washington Governor Jay Inslee and Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon, two of the leading thinkers on clean energy in their respective parties. I want to thank our sponsors at the Nuclear Energy Institute for making this event possible. We'll hear from them a little later on. But first, let's dive into the conversation I recently had with Washington Governor Jay Inslee. He's serving his third and final term as Washington's governor after a career that included 2 stints in Congress and service in the state legislature. He's made clean energy a hallmark of his career in public service, and he's the co-author of Apollo's Fire, a 2007 book on the future of clean energy. So he's been thinking about this for a long time. Let's jump right into my conversation with Governor Jay Inslee. Governor Inslee, for those who don't know, you signed the Clean Energy Transformation Act into law in 2019, committing the state to an electric supply free from greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. We're 4 years into that 26-year horizon. Is the transition on pace to meet its goals?
I think we are actually, and it's very confidence building to see the progress we're making, and not only sort of it's confidence building, and it's very joyous occasion because it's not just a statistical accomplishment; it's a real accomplishment with real jobs being created. And just to see the capital buildup of clean energy in my state is just a joy. You know, you go to Lind, Washington, and you see these solar panels going up, a very rural area. You see, new carbon battery companies going on in Moses Lake, and a company that's building a pure aviation fuel, a bunch of Stanford grads over in Moses Lake, Washington. You see the incredible transformation of our buildings with net zero buildings going in. I was at a low-income housing, little tiny spot in Lopez Island, Washington the other day, helping us accomplish this by building net zero using buildings in low-income housing. So just to see this happening on a visual day-to-day basis is thrilling as a sort of statistical one. And we have made progress. We've reduced our emissions per capita since 2005 by 15%, by unit of GDP by 51%. So yes, I feel good about the progress that we're making, but we have to understand it's kind of like when you're going up a mountain. Yes, we're heading in the right direction. We're according to the pace we need, but we still have a lot of climbing to do. And that's why we need to continue to work on our permitting issues, although we made some progress on that. We have to have ways to site these new generating capacities that we need to do. That presents always challenges. So there's more work to do legislatively and otherwise.
Yeah, and one of the things you did a couple of years later was the Cap and Invest program that the legislature approved in 2021. And now this year, the ban on sales of new gas-powered cars by 2035. How much do those initiatives go to contribute toward bringing down these overall emissions?
Well, they're huge. They're absolutely huge. And they're probably of the majority of the statutory work that we'll have to do in the next 10 years. So these have been enormous strides, the combination of those two. And by the way, our building codes, in addition to basically saying we're weaning ourselves off of polluting cars and 100% electrical generating, but we're also saying we're gonna stop doing hookups of toxic natural gas as well as early potentially as next year. So we stop digging the hole deeper of tying ourselves to polluting fossil fuel. So the combination of those things are a gargantuan progress. Now we just to make sure that they are effectuated, and that's what we intend to do. And I think this is really important, concept that we've been successful on, in that not to look for any one silver bullet or arrow on how to attack climate change and how to build a clean energy economy. You need multiple systems, you need multiple industries, you need multiple policies. And I think we've done a really successful job in Washington of really attacking emissions throughout the spectrum of our economy and using different policies. No one policy is going to solve this problem. When you look at the embedded subsidies for years that fossil fuel industries have had, When you look at the infrastructure, it takes multiple policies to actually reduce your emissions dramatically, and we're doing that, but it's working.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have a sense as you move towards this carbon-free electric grid, what's the mix that Washington needs to achieve the goal? Do you have a sense of sort of how solar and wind and nuclear and the rest all add up to the electricity you need?
First off, they all have a place to play. We need to encourage all of them, and we are. We have had huge increases in solar and wind in the last 5 to 6 years. Both have huge remaining potential. We still have enormous potential that has not been tapped. We have enormous acreage, in particularly in eastern Washington, where the sun shines 300 days a year, for solar, and the applications that are coming in are very robust, and we feel very, very good about that. We still have untapped wind potential, particularly off of our coastline. We have probably some of the best, if not the best, wind resource for offshore wind of literally any place on the globe. It just blows 12 knots constantly off our shoreline. That is an untapped potential as well. We are looking at the potential of safer, smaller nuclear facilities, if those can be demonstrated. That is under development. It hasn't happened yet, but it's under development. We don't have a specific percentage assigned to each one, and I think the market's going to sort that out rather than dictating it. So we haven't dictated it from the governmental level. The market's going to sort this out. But I can tell you that all of those sources of non-carbon based energy are continue to come down in price. You can't predict it. It always outstrips our ability to predict how fast they're coming down in price. 80% for solar, and that line continues to go down. So this is cheap energy at this point, and we just need to get it built, capitalized, and permitted, and they're working on that. I am pleased that we did pass a bill to ease our permitting and streamlining our permitting position, not only for the generating capacity, but for the transmission lines as well that are necessary to distribute this energy. The federal government can help us on this, by the way. This is one of the things that the federal government has not achieved yet, which is streamlined permitting for transmission systems. Mm-hmm. So we all have a continued work to do, and I'm just cannot be more thrilled at the technological changes that are still going on. I cannot turn around and I don't learn some new technology that's coming on like I didn't know about. I met a company the other day. This is not exactly generating capacity, but this is how even I can be surprised. I wrote a book about this 10 years ago, or co-authored a book. I've introduced bills since 2003. I've been at this a long time, but I'm still surprised. I was met this company in Wenatchee, Washington the other day. They make artificial diamonds, right? So they sell jewelry diamonds that's very successful right now because they're just as beautiful as diamonds produced the old-fashioned way. But they now want to use it to make inverters for electric cars that can decrease the weight by half and the volume by 50%. And so you can get 6% more mileage on your electric car. And these guys figured out how to make diamonds. Now they're going to make our electric cars go farther. I mean, it's just very exciting to me to see all the technologies that are being developed here.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned the small modular reactors, and I know 2 energy companies have announced an agreement to build up to 12 small modular reactors in central Washington. Is that the future of nuclear? Is that how you see it?
It is one potential future, but I will mention another one, which is frankly even more exciting, which is fusion energy. We have a company in our state called Helion Energy. They are so far along the development of fusion energy, which of course is not fission energy, and so it doesn't have the risks associated with that, and produces exactly pure electricity with a fusion process and almost unlimited fuel sources. They have already signed an agreement actually to produce fusion-based energy by 2028. Microsoft is the offtake. Microsoft is the buyer of that electricity. This is a stunning, stunning development in the world of electrical generation because fusion energy is virtually limitless. And so that development of all the developments would be the largest groundbreaking achievement and I hope it comes to pass. You know, you never know what hurdles you'll run into, but Microsoft believes it is a real obtainable result in that very, very short time window. So keep your eyes focused on a little company called Helion.
Yeah, yeah. We've heard a lot of Republican governors embracing these small modular reactors. Can tell me what role do they play in the future of a clean energy grid? And is there a reason that Democrats haven't embraced them as much as some of your Republican colleagues?
Well, I don't know the answer. My position on it is that we should be supportive of continued development of that potential. You still have a nuclear waste issue that you have to solve, though. Even though they're small, there still is a waste stream. And I think perhaps Democrats are not as sanguine about being able to solve that problem as quick as we need to. If we're going to develop them, we need two things. One, we need continued development of the technology, and that research is going on, as you know. But we do have to find a way for a permanent disposal of the waste, and that has not been achieved in this country yet. So both of those need to happen. I support efforts to achieve those, but frankly, the nearer term right now are these others more competitive. Basically, those need to compete with other technologies, low and zero. So solar, wind, offshore wind, and the like. Storage, which is very, very important. Storage, in a sense, you can think of that as a generating capacity. Those are available today. So pump storage, where you pump water uphill and you run it back through a generator, it's really low tech. It just depends on gravity. So new technologies need to compete with those existing clean sources of energy, and those are just going gangbusters today. So we'll let the powers of competition find us the best deal.
Yeah, yeah. We've seen some states like Wyoming and Colorado exploring technologies like carbon capture. Are there other, you mentioned some of the emerging technologies that are getting you excited. What else is out there in the climate space that is going to help Washington reach its goals in the future?
Well, there are just so many. It's hard to, in my state, it's hard to, every week there's a new one. You know, I'll give you an example. Largest truck in the world today is powered by a fuel cell built in Seattle, Washington, that uses hydrogen and has no emissions and no tailpipe. Largest truck in the world. And that the truck, like the radiator is like 40 feet tall. It's pretty amazing. And a company called First Mode has developed a fuel cell that can use hydrogen with no emissions, using water. Essentially, ultimately is a way to generate hydrogen. And then you use the hydrogen, you run it through a fuel cell, you produce electricity, you run your electric motor. That's the kind of thing that all of a sudden is bursting on the scene all over the state of Washington. And that's the kind of thing that I'm continually running into. Yeah. So, you know, the other day, Breakthrough Energy, you know, one of Bill Gates' investments, just announced a new thermal storage battery, in effect, using a new material. I ran to a little company called Small Planet in Tumwater, Washington the other day, almost kind of a mom and a pop, but they've developed one of the first heat pump solutions that they've built this heat pump that you can just lift with a crane on top of your apartment and boom, you got a heat pump. And now they're figuring out a way to use salt basically as a storage facility, which can half the space it takes to use water associated with a heat pump to make them a lot easier to use. Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is there's so many of them, it's hard to keep up with them. And we got to be very optimistic of our ability to build a clean energy economy because of this enormous innovative capability that we have in this country, starting in my state, of course.
Yeah, of course, of course. So just about every blue state has adopted some kind of clean energy transition plan. As you look across the policy landscape, what should other states be taking from Washington? What have you done that others should emulate?
Well, the first thing I would take for Washington is it works. If you embrace these policies, you'll get huge job creation, you'll get new technology, and you'll have cleaner air and less asthma in your kids. So that's the first thing I would take from the state of Washington. But I would also take this idea that it's great to do multiple things, not just one thing. And I think that we've shown our success at that. Third, we can always improve on what we've already done. Look, we have a cap and invest bill that we passed, and we learned some lessons from the bill California passed
Mhm.
And as a result, we can make it a little better. We have the best environmental justice provisions on that to make sure the people who are disproportionately impacted, frequently communities of color, have appropriate investments in those communities. I think that's important.
Yeah.
The other thing I would take is be bold, because you're not alone. Look, we have the U.S. Climate Alliance. When we were at Climate Week in New York a couple of weeks ago, we announced that our 25 states that are in the U.S. Climate Alliance, we've committed to getting 20 million new heat pumps for our citizens in those 25 states. So you're not alone. And that's an important thing to say, because we know we have to go faster than the federal government. President Biden has done a superb job leading the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a fantastic act. It's going to create thousands and thousands of jobs. But we have to go faster than that. And I'm glad states have an opportunity to do that. And you know, the states that are doing that, those are the states with the fastest economic growth as well. Those 25 states have faster economic growth than the states that are not acting to build a clean energy economy. So there's a few things to take from Washington.
Yeah.
But you also know you're always going to be in second place, you know. You just got to get used to Washington being first.
So, well, on the other side of that, I mean, you still have a year to go in office, year and change. What are other states doing that you want to adopt in Washington? What's on your agenda for your last year in office?
Well, let's see. We're still have to admit that California has a higher percentage of electric car sales than we do by 1% or 2%.
Mm-hmm.
So that's unacceptable to us. And we intend to continue building charging stations like crazy, and also use some of our Climate Commitment Act that has generated over $1 billion to make it easier for people to get electric cars, and use creative ways of doing that. One of which I saw up at Lopez Island. Again, I was at this low income community I was telling you about, where they have a shared electric car program where 8 families share an electric car. They got a charger right on the site, and it's working out great for them, right? Because you know, our cars are in our garage 97% of the time. They just sit there. We have all that money sitting there. They have a way to share a vehicle that's really working for them. So we're trying to create new ways for people to get access to these technologies, to accelerate to be in the rightful place, which is one step ahead of California. Mm-hmm. But I feel good about the progress we're making on that.
Yeah. I want to end with the politics here. And one thing that's always struck me, and I've followed you for your entire career pretty much, you have always used that sort of the jobs frame for climate, for new energy. President Biden has taken some of that message up this year. Just his last couple of weeks, visits to places like Michigan, he's talked about clean energy through the lens of jobs. How should he frame a government response to climate change as he runs for re-election next year?
Well, you know, he won the White House and I did not, so I'm not sure I should be the one giving him advice. But I guess what I would say is keep showing people the reality of these jobs and sharing with them the reality of these things. You know, people can deny the existence of climate change when New York's under, 2 feet of water. New Orleans doesn't have drinking water now because of saltwater intrusion up the Mississippi, because the Mississippi's drying up. The water is 99 degrees off the coast of Florida, and forest fires are so bad in Canada that the whole, large areas of the country are under this smoke, and our forests are burning down in my state. And yet people continue to deny the existence of this problem, and Republicans call it a hoax. But what they can't deny is when your daughter or your nephew gets a job in a battery plant building batteries, or you get a job in Seattle building fuel cell engines for trucks, or making new types of materials for electric cars in Wenatchee. Those are real things. You can't deny that. Mm-hmm. And you just have a tremendous story to be able to tell that. So to continue to tell that story, I think does make sense. I think emphasizing that we want these to be family wage jobs and supporting the unions that are successful and making sure that these are family wage jobs. That's very important, to support the union movement, make sure that they're good job or good paying jobs when these jobs are created. That's very important. And I guess the third thing is don't forget that this is a health issue. This is about the health of our children. It's about an epidemic of asthma that our children are suffering now because of this pollution. And if you're running for office, talking to suburban parents, particularly mothers, it's not a bad thing to mention we're trying to keep our kids to have clean air to breathe. Yeah. And it's a real thing. Last summer, our kids could not go outside for a week or two because of the forest fire smoke. It is a health issue. We're losing thousands of people to premature death due to respiratory and cardiac problems. Mm-hmm. So this isn't, I love polar bears, I really do, but it's not just about the polar bears, it's about our children, and focusing on that health message to try to reduce pollution, I think is fundamental to our success.
All right. Washington Governor Jay Inslee, thank you so much for taking all the time today.
Thank you. Thanks for being interested. Come see us.
All right. You got it. We're grateful to Governor Inslee for joining us today. Let's take a brief break for a message from our sponsors today, the Nuclear Energy Institute.
The future belongs to them, but building it depends on the choices we make today. Thanks to years of innovation, nuclear energy already produces almost half of our clean energy right here at home. Proven, reliable, 24/7 energy, and it's only getting better. New technology makes nuclear more affordable and easier to build, creating new opportunities for clean energy jobs. Choose a future built for them. Choose nuclear energy.
Okay, now on to our next guest, Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon. Governor Gordon won re-election to his second term in 2022 with 79% of the vote. He spent his tenure diversifying the state's economy and growing the tech and finance sectors specifically. And I think that makes him an interesting guest today, given how much energy those two sectors use. So let's go to my conversation with Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon. Governor Gordon, thank you for joining us today. There's so much happening in Wyoming's nuclear industry right now. And I want to start with Natrium, the first ever nuclear reactor in the state. You've called it a game-changing plant. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so Reed, thank you very much for such a kind introduction. I have to say that Natrium really marks a step forward. The Bill Gates Foundation and the Department of Energy and Rocky Mountain Power are combining an effort to, build the first of its kind small modular nuclear reactor that will be in southwestern Wyoming. It is sodium cooled, so it has a passive feature that if it loses power or something like that, it automatically and passively will shut down. And so it's a real safety improvement. Some people will say, well, it's like Clinch River and we've done this before, it hasn't worked. But the fact of the matter is that at Idaho National Nuclear Laboratory, similar technology has been grinding away for years. Why it's a game changer is with all the renewables coming into the portfolio, the intermittency of those presents a challenge at certain times. And so we need to have a way to have dependable, distributable 24/7 power, and Natrium actually will provide that. And the fact that it's smaller in design, modular, means that the economics are going to improve over the light water reactors that we currently have. I think we have 92 in the country. They're all very expensive. This will reduce the economic footprint of that. So
yeah. Well, let's talk about those economics of a nuclear plant. I mean, especially as fossil fuel markets change over time. What does the plant mean for Wyoming's bottom line?
Well, it's being put in a community called Kemmer that had a wonderful power plant still kind of churning away there, Naughton, and there's an associated coal mine with it that had employed a number of people. Reed, one of the things that I think people forget about coal mining, particularly in a place like Wyoming, and I'll just make this point because I think there's a lot of negative press around coal. But what a coal plant takes is, particularly a surface mine like the one we have, and I'm sure it's true for underground as well, but for the surface mines, there has to be a mine engineer that comes in. There has to be a lot of establishment of economic, environmental data that are associated with it. You have to understand what the landscape looks like, but you're going to have to reclaim it to that. You have to lay out the mine plan and how it's going to be developed. These are all high-skilled, high-paying jobs. And then, of course, the mining takes place, again, high-skilled, high-paying jobs over a period of time. And then, the reclamation piece at the end, which is also high-skilled, high-paying. And in the particular case of Naughton, with Rocky Mountain deciding to move away from coal, the town was really imperiled. What Natrium brings on board is real hope for the future, new jobs, new types of technology, and a real embrace of the future, which is terrific. What Wyoming has done is to say a lot of the skills that are going to be needed in a nuclear plant are similar, but really require some additional education. So we've really tried to align our university. Wyoming has one university that is our research facility, and we'll talk about, I hope, a little bit more about all the work they're doing there on energy. But connect that to our community college in Rock Springs, a community that's fairly close by, to be able to support the kinds of jobs and manufacturing that will come with this. We are very excited about those opportunities.
Yeah, it's fascinating you bring that up, because over and over, the conversations I have with legislators and lawmakers, it doesn't matter what the issue is. It all seems to come back to the workforce challenges that literally every industry in America is facing these days. So when you talk about building a new plant like this, I mean, you're talking about probably hundreds, maybe thousands of jobs. How do you make sure that Wyoming has the skilled workers that are going to be needed to operate the plant today, tomorrow, years down the road?
Well, one of the great things about folks that grow up in Wyoming, and particularly, I grew up ranching, and so my kids have all done pretty well, I guess, in the job market, because when you're ranching, you work until the job is done. It's not, I'm going to come to work a little bit late and I'm going to go home at closing time because I got some other things to do. So there's a real work ethic here in Wyoming. The jobs have not been here as much as we'd like to see, but now we've really diversified our economy to not only just be the production of energy, mining jobs, et cetera. We want to keep those in place, but also the advanced manufacturing. So we've really focused on building an ambitious workforce. I think that if we can attract families, and what we're doing to make sure that families want to come is making sure we have a world-class education system at the grade school all the way through high school and into college, because that's when families want to come. I talked a little bit about how important it was that we have steady work over time, because that builds a community, that makes a main street. The town of Gillette, for example, was nothing but a little cow town back in the 90s, and now it's a major metropolis. Well, not metropolis, but it's a major city, and it's because people come, they invest, little businesses build off of that. The ancillary stuff that comes from that primary economic activity improves. So keeping families here, making sure they have world-class education, making sure we meet the needs of the industry, and we get people thinking about how they can make things work better.
Mm-hmm. Wyoming is unique in that you actually have the raw materials necessary to fuel nuclear plants. What's the state doing to develop uranium and other rare earth mining material?
Well, this is the irony with our nuclear industry, is that we were sort of moving early on into the nuclear industry, and then 3 Mile Island happened, and Chernobyl and Fukushima really took the nuclear industry took a kind of a hit. Wyoming does have a lot of uranium. We've got several mining operations that produce, really produce terrific amounts of uranium. We're one of the, I think we're number one for uranium reserves. New Mexico also has some. But just getting the initial uranium out, the ore, is one piece of it. And then you have to convert it into yellow cake, and then you have to actually enrich it into what we're going to be talking about with natrium is HALEU, high acid, low enriched uranium. And what we don't have in our country right now, it's all kind of been moribund for a while, is the ability to convert. There's only one plant, Converdyne, and then also the enrichment, a couple potentially along the way, but we're behind. We have depended on Russia for HALEU and for our uranium stocks for a very long time. And we have seen, obviously, with the Ukraine, that being dependent on a foreign power, particularly one that may be an adversary, is not a good place to be. So we're going to have to build that capacity in the country. We certainly have those reserves, and we have the ability to make our nuclear industry domestic, secure, and a great economic driver.
Yeah. You've talked about an all of the above energy strategy, and I feel like we hear that from a lot of elected officials. What role does nuclear play in that strategy? I mean, how do you want to see the industry developing going forward?
Well, nuclear, and let me step back for a second. Obviously, I think it's very important that we have an all of the above energy strategy, because if we have an all of the above energy strategy, we can talk about honestly what the positives and negatives are of any particular energy. There is no silver bullet, particularly when you put the climate equation into play. So I really want to make it clear that every fuel source, every energy source that we have really needs to be understood, talked about in an honest fashion, and understand what the consequences are. We're very excited. Just the other day, did a groundbreaking on the second largest in the world, but the largest domestic wind farm, the Chokecherry Sierra Madre. It's 274 miles of square miles of turbines. That's going to have huge impacts on the environment. It's wonderful what it is doing. It's a great economic driver, but the mass of land that takes up is a lot, and no matter how much wind you develop, it isn't doing anything with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that's where we really need to focus on, is how we get CO2, methane emissions actually sequestered. So what nuclear does is to improve that portfolio, and obviously for Wyoming, we're very excited about it. We think it has a great future. There are also some very specific types of opportunities that I hadn't really thought about until fairly recently. So villages in Alaska, for example, currently depend on diesel generators to produce electricity to keep lights on during the winter, and a small nuclear plant, which we've put on spaceships like Mariner, et cetera, can be scaled to a size where they can meet the needs of a community in Alaska without having to require the fuel having to be travel across the country and make sure it gets to these remote villages. So I think there's some really specific opportunities, in particular assets, and we need to think about that. Jeffrey Uden was just at a conference that I was at, and was pointing out that if we electrify our entire fleet of vehicles, we're going to be using 100% of our cobalt. All the copper that we've mined since 1900 to 2021, we'd have to produce in the next few years. There are economic consequences to the conversion, which to me means, as we add things to the portfolio, we have more ability to pick and choose where the best technologies can be applied. And that doesn't mean necessarily that fossil fuels go away. I know that's what everybody wants, on sort of this macro level at this point. But the fact of the matter is we can improve our technology, do carbon capture and sequestration. Wyoming has, priority to be able to help with carbon sequestration. We're very excited about the potential. That's hundreds of thousands of years of sequestering that we can do. And that's allowed us to say, Wyoming is not just carbon neutral. Wyoming is going to be carbon negative by 2050.
Yeah, that's fascinating. As you talk about this carbon capture and sequestration, I mean, it sounds like a lot of the conversation around nuclear is evolving to take in climate change and to actually tackle climate change in a way that other powers might not be able to, other power sources.
Absolutely correct. And I think also bringing that back on it, one of the other features, so much of the strategy at this point about addressing climate change kind of on the national policy level, it really revolves around having energy markets, having grid infrastructure that's improved and moving quicker. That our existing grid does not operate at optimal efficiency because of the intermittency. So we've got a long way to go to be able to modernize all of that. And that's one of the big challenges that we focused on here in Wyoming. Sierra Madre chokecherry, we started talking about that in 2006. It's only this year that it actually was able to break ground. So if you take that period of time and you apply it to what we're going to do to bring new wind on, bring new solar, bring all this sort of stuff on, and change the grid infrastructure, we've clearly got to do something about our permitting to get that done quicker.
Yeah. The last thing, you've been very generous with your time, but you mentioned things like 3 Mile Island and Fukushima. For so long, it's felt like the conversation around nuclear has just been stuck in this political limbo. And now that conversation is starting to shift. What do you think is behind that change?
Well, I think climate, nuclear, two things have happened, I think, as we sort of embraced climate as an issue and energy and how we transition going forward. One of them was the notion that somehow we could renewable our way into an emission-free future, which was a bit of a fairy tale, and we saw that we've seen it in Germany, we've seen it in the economics of sort of grid structure in the Northwest and others, and so the reality of this has been that with the war in Ukraine and the corresponding inability of this administration to be able to issue permits apace, demand for travel did not decrease. And so the need for feedstocks, increased. Nuclear, I think, entering into that equation solves a lot of those issues. It provides the dependable, dispatchable electricity. It does it 24/7. The technology, as I say, is based on some stuff that's been, pretty well proven and improved. So that as you see, the challenges that have happened on some of these other plants that we talked about, 3 Mile Island and others, this is a system designed to shut down passively. So it doesn't require a generator. It doesn't require, power supply. It just gradually subsides. I think one of the issues we're going to have to worry about is nuclear waste. There's also some really exciting work being done there that allows us perhaps to be able to use some of the spent fuel from light water reactors and mix that as we refine the HALEU, so we can actually reduce our stockpiles. And then the waste that comes from this much more efficient reactor is dramatically reduced. But all of these questions have to be dealt with honestly, as I said. One of the exciting things I think for this region of the country, quite frankly, is we're really open-minded about what the future brings. So we're not sort of investing totally in one technology or another. As I said, wind is going great guns here in Wyoming. We're part of Utah and Colorado and New Mexico of hydrogen, which becomes a big fuel source. Wyoming has probably the foremost lab on porous media and fluid movement through porous media, which means that we're able to do great research on ways that you can transport hydrogen. So I just think this area of the country is going to have a lot of opportunity. And as you look at hydrogen, of course, nuclear becomes really important because it's a relatively good energy source for that.
Mm-hmm. All right, fantastic. Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon, thank you so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate your insights.
Thank you, Reed.
All right. Thanks, Governor Gordon, for your insights today. I want to end today with my conversation with Maria Korsnick, the president and chief executive of the Nuclear Energy Institute. Take a listen. Maria, first of all, thanks for sponsoring our event today. I'm glad we have a chance to get your perspective on this. We just heard a lot from the governors about the future of nuclear power, but let's back up a little bit and talk about the present for a minute. What's the state of the nuclear power industry today?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Reed, and I appreciate having an opportunity to connect with you today. I'll tell you, this is a once-in-a-lifetime moment, really, for nuclear today in the world. Not only here in the United States, but around the world, a lot of attention is coming over to nuclear power. So today, we have plants that are operating in the United States that's providing 20% of the electricity for the United States, but about 50% of the carbon-free electricity. So nuclear is really a workhorse for carbon-free energy today. And as we look forward, and I'm sure we'll talk more in your program, there's a huge opportunity for that to grow.
Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, it seems like lawmakers are talking about nuclear today in different ways than they did in years past. I mean, how has that conversation evolved? And specifically, what role have the technological improvements in the industry done to change that conversation?
Yeah, it really has. Nuclear, by its nature, has really gained a lot of attention as of late. And your question is really, Maria, why? What's driving that? It's really being driven two large things. People have interest in climate and climate security, and people have interest in energy security. And those two drivers are really creating a lot of attention to nuclear energy specifically. So why is that? Well, nuclear operates 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So it's that carbon-free power that can form the backbone of our generation. Wind and solar are there. They're great when you have wind and great when you have sun, but the intermittency of that really needs to have something that you can connect to that's there all the time. And that's the role that nuclear can play. And if you look at the track record for nuclear, very high reliability, greater than a 92% capacity factor. And you say, oh, what's a capacity factor? It's just running 92% of the time that it's available to run. And that's very, very high. Again, speaking to that always on nuclear energy. And it's very resilient. It's very reliable. And so these are the things that are really attracting people to say, oh, I really want that affordable, reliable power. And that's where nuclear comes in.
You touched on this a minute ago there, but I'm struck by the fact that in the energy conversation, you don't get a lot of bipartisan conversations. And yet here we have a Democratic governor, a Republican governor embracing nuclear technology. Is there a difference in the way Democrats and Republicans are pitching this to their bases, to their legislators, to their constituents?
There is. And honestly, the bipartisan support is beautiful. You said it yourself. And at a federal level, I'll just echo what you're saying. I see Republican governors and I see Democrat governors. Same things here in Washington, D.C. We get support from Republicans. We get support from Democrats. There's not too much that people are agreeing to here in Washington, D.C. But nuclear power is one of those things. And you said it well. They come to nuclear perhaps for different reasons, but for us, what we want is the support, the understanding, and the drive. So however it is that you come to us, we're happy to be a part of that conversation. So Republicans long-term have really been so strong supporters of nuclear for the technology reasons, national security reasons, jobs. Democrats more on the climate conversation, also the jobs conversation. So again, a variety of reasons that are pulling the left and the right together, but they are being pulled together and creating very positive conversations for nuclear.
Yeah, and as you say, I'm pretty sure you don't care about how they get there, just so long as they get there, right? Yeah.
That's right.
At the federal level, I mean, what has happened at the federal level lately that has spurred this change in the state level conversation?
Yeah, so think about the bipartisan infrastructure package that passed just a few years ago. Again, that bipartisan support that funded advanced reactor demonstration projects, namely the ARDP program. So it funded that program, but those programs, they get deployed in the state. So the ARDP was funded, but it's being built in Wyoming, right? It's being built in Texas. And so you get those decisions at a federal level that have those distinct fingerprints now at the state level. More recently, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. It also sent strong signals for nuclear. On the current nuclear, there was a production tax credit on the current fleet. Again, that flows to the states. And at the same token, there was a technology neutral tax credit or investment tax credit or a production tax credit that also, if you're clean and you produce clean, that you're open to these tax credits. And so we were actually really supportive that it wasn't called a nuclear tax credit. We want it to be technology neutral. If you bring clean energy to the grid, you should get that compensation.
When you're talking to state lawmakers, I mean, the core of the Pluribus News audience here, what are you telling them? What do state level policymakers need to be thinking about, need to be doing to bring nuclear to their states?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked. Actually, we have a policy document to help the states get ideas, and we're sort of sharing, here's what some other states are doing, here's some things that you might want to consider. So I would encourage that. It's on our website. But things like, many states are putting in studies for, hey, what would it be like to bring a small modular reactor to my state? I think North Dakota and South Dakota, for example, are doing some of those studies. And that's a great way to sort of introduce the nuclear conversation. Some states are putting together caucuses at their legislative level to sort of talk about and better understand nuclear. I think the state of Maryland has put one of those in. Some of them are bipartisan, bicameral. Again, creating that conversation around nuclear to help educate. Some states have had moratoria in place, for example, that says we're not allowed to build nuclear in the state. Well, they're repealing those moratoria. West Virginia was one recently that repealed that. I think of the 16 sort of long-standing nuclear moratoria that have been placed over the last few years, 6 have been repealed. So you can get an idea of the trend. And, for many decades, there was no motion, no conversation about repealing. And then just the last couple of years to have 6 repealed, that kind of gives you a view of what the trend is, a trend towards, I want to better understand nuclear. I think we want to build nuclear into our portfolio. How do I do that?
Gotcha. All right. Maria Korsnick, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Nuclear Energy Institute. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for making time to be with us today. Save the date. Our next Pluribus Spotlight is coming up Wednesday, the 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's our annual election preview event, and we'll hear from the 2 governors who are leading their party's efforts to win the key races up this year. And we might preview a little 2024 presidential election as well. Until then, I'm Reed Wilson. Thanks for being a part of the Pluribus News community. We'll see you next time.